Family Guy has been on our screens for over 25 years now, and in that time, it's built up layers of theories, controversies, banned episodes, and dark secrets that most fans have never even heard of. From surface-level facts all the way down to the absolute darkest corners of this show's history, we're going deep today. This is the Family Guy iceberg. Let's start at the top with the surface level. The stuff that most casual fans already know, but that sets the foundation for everything else we're about to explore. If you've watched even a handful of episodes, most of this will be familiar territory. But stick with us, because the deeper we go, the darker and stranger things get. Family Guy was created by Seth MacFarlane, a guy who knew he wanted to make cartoons before he could even read properly. MacFarlane started drawing when he was around 2 years old, and by the time he was 9, he had his own comic strip published in a local Connecticut newspaper called the Kent Dispatch. The strip was called Walter Crouton, and while it wasn't exactly groundbreaking, it showed that this kid had something. He grew up obsessed with classic cartoons, old Hollywood movies, and the kind of comedy that mixed high and low-brow humor in equal measure. MacFarlane attended the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the most prestigious art schools in the country, where he studied animation and film. It was during his time there that he created a short film called The Life of Larry, which was essentially the proto-version of Family Guy. It featured a fat, bumbling guy named Larry and his intellectual talking dog Steve. Sound familiar? His professors were impressed enough to send the film to Hanna-Barbera, which led to MacFarlane getting a job writing for shows like Johnny Bravo, Dexter's Laboratory, and Cow and Chicken. He later made a sequel short called Larry and Steve, which refined the concept even further. Fox executives saw these shorts and were intrigued enough to commission a pilot. MacFarlane was just 24 years old when Fox gave him a budget of around $50,000 to make the Family Guy pilot, making him the youngest showrunner in television history at the time. The pilot episode, Death Has a Shadow, premiered on January 31, 1999, right after Fox's broadcast of Super Bowl 33. That time slot was absolutely golden because it meant the show had a built-in audience of millions of people who were already watching television. Around 22 million viewers tuned in for that first episode, which was a massive number for a brand new animated series. The pilot introduced us to the Griffin family living in Quahog, Rhode Island, a fictional town that MacFarlane based loosely on Cranston, Rhode Island, where he spent time during his college years. The family structure was intentionally designed to mirror the classic American sitcom format, but with everything cranked up to absurd levels. Peter Griffin, the overweight, beer-drinking, dim-witted patriarch. Lois Griffin, the attractive, patient wife from a wealthy family who inexplicably married a man far below her social status. Chris Griffin, their obese teenage son who is essentially a younger version of Peter. Meg Griffin, the perpetually mistreated and ignored daughter who would become one of television's most famous punching bags. Stewie Griffin, the diabolical baby genius with a British accent and plans for world domination. And Brian Griffin, the family's talking dog who drinks martinis, writes novels, and serves as the intellectual counterpoint to Peter's stupidity. The show distinguished itself from other animated comedies through its heavy use of cutaway gags, those quick visual jokes that interrupt the narrative to show a completely unrelated scenario, usually triggered by a character saying something along the lines of "This is worse than the time I did something with someone famous." These cutaway gags became Family Guy's signature comedy device and were so distinctive that they essentially defined the show's identity. Love them or hate them, cutaways became the single most recognizable element of Family Guy's comedy style. Another defining characteristic is the floating timeline. Unlike shows that age their characters in real time, Family Guy exists in a kind of temporal limbo where characters only age when the plot requires it. Meg has gone from 15 to 18 over the course of the series, but Stewie remains a baby despite having experienced multiple Christmases, birthdays, and what should be years' worth of adventures. Peter's age has fluctuated wildly depending on the episode, with different flashbacks placing his birth anywhere from the 1950s to the 1980s. The show's creators have acknowledged these inconsistencies and essentially told fans not to think about it too hard, which is both frustrating and kind of fitting for a show that has never cared much about internal logic. The town of Quahog itself has become a character in the show, populated by a dense cast of recurring figures who each bring their own brand of comedy and controversy. Joe Swanson, the wheelchair-bound police officer and neighbor of the Griffins, represents the show's complicated relationship with disability. Cleveland Brown, the mild-mannered black friend who eventually got his own spin-off, represents the show's complicated relationship with race. And Glenn Quagmire, the sex-obsessed airline pilot whose behavior ranges from inappropriate to genuinely criminal, represents the show's willingness to create characters who would be monsters in any realistic context but are played purely for laughs. The supporting cast extends deep into Quahog's fictional community. Tom Tucker, the narcissistic news anchor. Mort Goldman, the neurotic pharmacist. Adam West, the former mayor played by the actual Adam West until his death in 2017, whose portrayal was so beloved that the show retired the character and renamed the town's high school in his honor. Herbert, the elderly neighbor with a transparently predatory interest in young boys. Dr. Hartman, the incompetent physician. Bruce, the soft-spoken recurring character who seems to have a different job in every appearance. Each of these characters contributes to the dense comedic ecosystem of Quahog and provides the writers with a vast ensemble to draw from when constructing their cutaway gags and storylines. One of the most distinctive elements of Family Guy's comedy is its extended gag format, where a joke is drawn out far beyond the point where it should logically end. The most famous example is the chicken fight, a recurring bit where Peter gets into an elaborate, minutes-long brawl with Ernie the giant chicken over some minor slight, usually a bad coupon. These fights destroy buildings, span entire cities, and feature the kind of choreography you'd expect from an action movie rather than a comedy show. They serve no narrative purpose whatsoever, which is exactly the point. The humor comes from the absurd commitment to a completely pointless conflict. Another signature extended gag involves Peter hurting his knee and spending an excruciating amount of time on the ground gasping and hissing in pain. The first time viewers see this, it's mildly funny. The 10th time, it's annoying. The 20th time, it somehow becomes funny again through sheer persistence. This approach to comedy, where the joke is that the joke won't end, is a love-it-or-hate-it proposition that has defined Family Guy's humor for over 2 decades. The show also operates on a unique set of rules regarding who can understand Stewie. In the earlier seasons, it seemed like nobody could hear or understand the baby's elaborate speeches about world domination and his desire to kill Lois. But as the series progressed, more and more characters began responding to Stewie directly, with Brian being the most consistent communicator. This inconsistency has spawned entire fan theories, which we'll get into later, but at the surface level, it's just one of those things the show has never bothered to explain in any official capacity. Family Guy's humor has always existed in a deliberately provocative space. The show makes jokes about race, religion, disability, sexuality, politics, and virtually every other sensitive topic you can think of. This approach has earned it both a massive global fanbase and an equally massive number of critics who view the show as crude, offensive, and socially irresponsible. The Parents Television Council has been one of the show's most vocal opponents, naming Family Guy one of the worst shows for family viewing on multiple occasions and filing numerous complaints with the Federal Communications Commission about its content. But all of that controversy exists at the surface level. It's the tip of the iceberg. The stuff everyone already knows about Family Guy. The show is crude, it pushes buttons, it has a talking dog and a genius baby. What most people don't know is how deep the rabbit hole goes. How close this show came to never existing at all. How many episodes have been banned, censored, or altered beyond recognition in different countries. How the show's creator literally cheated death by minutes. And how the fan theories surrounding this cartoon are some of the darkest and most disturbing ideas you'll ever encounter about a piece of entertainment. So let's go a level deeper. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel, and let's talk about the cancellation saga. Most people know that Family Guy was cancelled at some point. What most people don't realize is that it was actually cancelled twice, and the story of how it came back from the dead is one of the most remarkable survival stories in television history. It's a story that fundamentally changed how networks think about programming and fan engagement. Family Guy premiered in January 1999 to those incredible post-Super Bowl numbers. 22 million viewers watching a brand new cartoon about a fat guy in Rhode Island. But here's the thing about post-Super Bowl premieres. They always deliver inflated numbers because the audience is already there. The real test comes when the show has to stand on its own, and that's where things started getting complicated for the Griffin family. The first season did reasonably well in the ratings. Airing on Sunday nights alongside The Simpsons and The X-Files, Family Guy finished its first season ranked 33rd in the Nielsen ratings with an average of about 12.8 million households tuning in. Those weren't spectacular numbers, but they were solid enough for a new show. Fox seemed satisfied and renewed the series for a second season. That's when Fox made what turned out to be a nearly fatal decision. For Season 2, which began in September 1999, the network moved Family Guy from its comfortable Sunday night slot to Thursday nights. This put the show in direct competition with some of the biggest programs on television, including NBC's Frasier, which was one of the most watched comedies in America. The ratings dropped dramatically. Family Guy went from being a solid performer to struggling for viewers, and the decline was steep enough to make Fox nervous. Things got even worse when the show was shuffled to Tuesday nights during the back half of the second season, where it went up against ABC's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which was pulling in absolutely massive audiences at the time. By May of 2000, Fox had seen enough. The ratings were too low, the competition was too stiff, and the network pulled the plug. Family Guy was officially cancelled after its second season. But then something unexpected happened. Fans of the show made enough noise that Fox decided to give it one more shot. In July of 2000, the network reversed its cancellation decision and ordered 13 more episodes for a third season. This was unusual but not unprecedented. Networks sometimes change their minds when fan reactions are particularly strong. The third season began airing in November 2001, but Fox made the same mistake all over again. They stuck Family Guy on Thursday nights at 8 p.m., putting it up against two of the biggest shows on television. Friends on NBC and Survivor on CBS. This was essentially a death sentence for any show that wasn't already a ratings juggernaut. Family Guy's numbers continued their downward spiral, and by May of 2002, Fox cancelled the show for a second time. The final episode of Season 3 didn't even air on Fox. It was held back and eventually shown on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block. At this point, most people in the industry assumed Family Guy was done for good. Shows that get cancelled twice don't come back. That's just how television works. Seth MacFarlane himself seemed to accept this reality and started exploring other projects. Fox, looking to capitalize on the modest cult following MacFarlane had built, approached him about creating a new show. This is How American Dad Was Born, a show that MacFarlane conceived as a more grounded version of Family Guy with less reliance on cutaway gags and a stronger focus on serialized storytelling. But while MacFarlane was moving forward with American Dad, something remarkable was happening with the show everyone had written off. In April 2003, Cartoon Network purchased the syndication rights to Family Guy for what was described as almost nothing. The network began airing reruns on its Adult Swim late-night programming block, and the results were staggering. Family Guy quickly became the highest-rated show on Adult Swim, pulling in around 1.9 million viewers per episode. For a cable network airing reruns of a cancelled show in a late-night time slot, those numbers were extraordinary. At the same time, the DVD releases of Family Guy seasons were performing beyond anyone's expectations. The first and second season box set sold approximately 2.2 million copies, making them the best-selling television DVD of 2003 and the second best-selling TV DVD of all time at that point, right behind the first season of Chappell's show. These weren't just good numbers. They were unprecedented numbers that made executives at Fox sit up and take notice. The combination of massive Adult Swim ratings and record-breaking DVD sales created a situation that had literally never happened before in television. A twice-cancelled show was proving, through unconventional revenue streams, that it had a much larger audience than its original ratings had suggested. Fox, which had dismissed Family Guy as a ratings failure, was now looking at concrete financial evidence that millions of people wanted more of this show. In 2004, Fox made the decision to revive Family Guy for a fourth season. The premiere aired on May 1, 2005, pulling in 11.85 million viewers, a massive number that vindicated the network's decision to bring the show back. This time, Fox gave the show a much more favorable time slot on Sunday nights, airing it after The Simpsons, where it would remain for years. Family Guy became the first television show to earn a revival based primarily on DVD sales and cable syndication performance. This was a watershed moment for the entertainment industry because it demonstrated that traditional Nielsen ratings weren't the only measure of a show's value. The Family Guy revival essentially created a new playbook for how cancelled shows could be brought back, a template that would later be used by shows like Arrested Development, Futurama, and countless others. What's particularly interesting about the cancellation saga is how it changed the show itself. Pre-cancellation Family Guy, seasons 1 through 3, is noticeably different from post-cancellation Family Guy. The earlier seasons were somewhat more grounded, the characters were more nuanced, and the humor, while still edgy, was generally less extreme. When the show came back for season 4, something had shifted. The cutaway gags became more frequent and more outlandish. The characters became more exaggerated versions of themselves. Peter went from a well-meaning but dim father to an actively destructive force of chaos. Meg went from being a relatively normal teenage girl to the family's designated abuse victim. Brian went from being the voice of reason to a pretentious, self-righteous hypocrite. And Stewie evolved from a baby bent on world domination and matricide to a more ambiguously gendered, pop culture-obsessed character whose evil genius tendencies gradually faded. This phenomenon of characters becoming more extreme versions of their defining traits over time is called Flanderization, named after The Simpsons character Ned Flanders, who went from a generally nice guy who happened to be religious to a caricature defined entirely by his Christianity. Flanderization is common in long-running shows, but in Family Guy's case, it was accelerated by the cancellation gap. The writers came back with a renewed sense of freedom and a "they can't cancel us twice" attitude that led to bolder, edgier, and sometimes more controversial content. MacFarlane himself has spoken about how the cancellation affected his approach to the show. In a 2024 interview with the Logically Speaking podcast, he recalled being called into Fox and being told they wanted to bring the show back. He described feeling genuinely excited because he thought Family Guy was dead and gone. The experience of losing the show and getting it back made him appreciate the opportunity in a way that influenced his creative decisions going forward. At the same time, there's a sense that MacFarlane has struggled with the show's longevity. He's publicly stated on multiple occasions that he thought Family Guy had run its course, only to see it continue year after year because the audience never went away. The show's return also had unexpected consequences for American Dad. MacFarlane had been developing American Dad as his primary creative outlet while Family Guy was cancelled. When both shows ended up on the air simultaneously, MacFarlane had to divide his attention between them. He chose to focus primarily on Family Guy, leaving American Dad's development largely in the hands of co-creators Mike Barker and Matt Weitzman. This division of labor is actually one of the reasons many critics consider American Dad to be the superior show, since it developed its own identity without MacFarlane's dominant creative influence and avoided some of the excesses that plague Family Guy's later seasons. Season 4's premiere episode, North by North Quahog, opened with one of the most meta moments in the show's history. Peter literally turns to his family and announces that they've been cancelled, then starts listing all the shows Fox cancelled to make room for failed replacements, including The Pits, a short-lived comedy that MacFarlane himself had written for. It was a cheeky acknowledgement of the show's tumultuous history with the network, and it set the tone for the more self-aware, meta-comedy approach that would define the revived series. The return episode also contained a running gag where Peter mentions he had been watching other animated shows during the cancellation, including The Simpsons, King of the Hill, and other Fox programming. He describes each one with backhanded compliments, essentially using the show's return as an opportunity to trash-talk every series that had survived while Family Guy was off the air. It was a quintessentially Family Guy move, turning what should have been a humble comeback into a victory lap combined with a roast session. The cancellation period also gave rise to one of the show's most enduring behind-the-scenes stories. During the hiatus, MacFarlane pitched several projects to various networks, but nothing quite worked. He's described the period as feeling unfinished, like the show had been taken away before he was done with it. This sense of unresolved creative business may explain the explosive burst of energy that characterized the early post-revival seasons, when the writers seemed determined to push every boundary they had been too cautious to approach in the original run. The economic mathematics of the revival are worth examining in detail because they fundamentally changed how the television industry values its properties. Before Family Guy, networks generally measured a show's worth by its live broadcast ratings. If those numbers fell below a certain threshold, the show was cancelled, and that was that. The Family Guy revival proved that a show's total audience could be dramatically larger than its live viewership suggested. The millions of people buying DVDs and tuning into Adult Swim reruns were just as valuable as, and in some cases more valuable than, the viewers who watched the original broadcast. This realization led to a fundamental shift in how networks evaluated their programming, with aftermarket potential becoming a crucial factor in renewal decisions. Patrick Warburton, who voices Joe Swanson, later revealed a hilarious detail about the cancellation era. His own mother, who belonged to the American Television Council, was actively trying to get Family Guy cancelled while Warburton was supporting his parents financially with money he earned from the show. She even asked him to sign a petition to cancel it. Warburton described the situation as the greatest irony, pointing out that his mother was essentially laundering money through herself by accepting financial support from a show she was trying to destroy. The actor's family's opposition to the show apparently stemmed from their religious background. His father had spent time in a monastery and nearly became a monk, and his mother was known for distributing pamphlets about what she described as the sins of certain private behaviors. Now let's go a bit deeper in the iceberg and talk about the shallow waters. Before we do, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Let's talk about the rivalry between Family Guy and The Simpsons, a feud that started with gentle ribbing and escalated into one of the most disturbing moments in animated television history. The comparison between Family Guy and The Simpsons was inevitable from the moment the show premiered. Both are animated comedies about dysfunctional American families airing on the same network. Both feature an overweight, bumbling father, an attractive wife who's too good for him, a dim-witted older son, a marginalized daughter, and a baby in a seemingly endless state of infancy. The structural similarities were obvious, and critics immediately began calling Family Guy a Simpsons rip-off. MacFarlane has always pushed back against these comparisons. He's argued that Peter Griffin is more inspired by Ralph Cramden from The Honeymooners than by Homer Simpson, and that the shows have fundamentally different comedy styles. The Simpsons tends to favor character-driven humor and social satire, while Family Guy relies more heavily on cutaway gags and shock comedy. But MacFarlane has also acknowledged that he was heavily influenced by The Simpsons, calling it in its prime one of the greatest comedy shows of all time. The Simpsons took their first major shot at Family Guy in a 2002 episode called Treehouse of Horror 13, where Peter Griffin appeared as one of hundreds of Homer Simpson clones in a Halloween segment called Send in the Clones. The implication was clear. Peter Griffin was just a copy of Homer Simpson. It was a quick visual gag, but it planted the flag for what would become an ongoing rivalry. The shots got sharper from there. In 2003, Simpsons writer and producer Al Jean publicly described Family Guy as a little too derivative and said the show should be more original. This was unusually direct criticism from someone inside the Simpsons camp, and it signaled that the writers weren't just making playful jabs anymore. They genuinely felt that Family Guy was treading on their creative territory. The most famous Simpsons dig came in the 2005 episode The Italian Bob, where two Italian police officers are shown flipping through a book of known criminals. As they turn the pages, viewers can clearly see a mugshot of Peter Griffin with the word plagiarismo listed as his crime. Below Peter's entry, Stan Smith from American Dad appears with the crime listed as plagiarismo di plagiarismo, implying that American Dad was a rip-off of a rip-off. It was a clever, funny jab that got a lot of attention from fans of both shows. What happened next was anything but funny. MacFarlane and his writers, apparently incensed by the plagiarism accusations, plotted their revenge in the Family Guy episode Moving Out, Brian's song from 2007. The response was wildly disproportionate to the gentle ribbing they'd received. In a cutaway sequence, a fake promotion for The Simpsons appeared on screen showing Marge Simpson. Quagmire then crashed into the scene and dragged Marge off screen, where he violently assaulted her. In case that wasn't disturbing enough, Marge returned to the screen suggesting she had actually enjoyed the experience. Quagmire and Marge then went back to the Simpson family home, where Homer walked in on them. The sound of gunshots followed as Quagmire murdered the entire Simpson family one by one, including what was heavily implied to be the 3 children. Fox executives were horrified. They pulled the scene from the episode's original broadcast and told the producers of both shows that they could no longer attack each other. The full scene was later included on the DVD release and aired on Adult Swim and TBS, but the damage was done. MacFarlane had responded to a relatively harmless Italian-language pun about plagiarism with a graphic depiction of sexual assault and family murder targeting the most iconic animated family in television history. During the DVD commentary, MacFarlane reportedly went on an extended rant about the situation, claiming that Fox was afraid of Simpsons executive producer James L. Brooks and that there was a double standard where The Simpsons could make jokes about Family Guy but not the other way around. The incident essentially ended the tradition of the two shows trading barbs. Fox's moratorium prevented either series from taking shots at the other for years afterward. MacFarlane claimed there was no real feud and that he and Simpsons creator Matt Groening were friends. Groening, for his part, apparently liked the controversial scene, even though Brooks and Gene were furious about it. It wasn't just The Simpsons taking shots at Family Guy. In 2006, South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone devoted a two-part episode called Cartoon Wars to savaging MacFarlane's show. The South Park episodes depicted Family Guy's writing process as being handled by manatees who randomly select balls containing words and combine them to create jokes, suggesting that Family Guy's humor was completely random and required no actual comedy writing skill. Parker and Stone were particularly contemptuous of the cutaway gag format, arguing that it wasn't real comedy writing because the jokes had no connection to the story or characters. MacFarlane's response to the South Park attack was notably more measured than his response to The Simpsons. He acknowledged that Parker and Stone were talented creators and even said he was honored that they cared enough about Family Guy to devote 2 episodes to it. This was a strikingly different reaction compared to the scorched earth approach he took with The Simpsons, and it suggests that MacFarlane had different levels of sensitivity depending on who was doing the criticizing. The South Park episodes went further than just mocking Family Guy's comedy style. They actually constructed an elaborate plot where Cartman tries to get Family Guy cancelled because he finds the show so offensive, while Kyle defends Family Guy's right to exist on the grounds of free speech. The deeper message of the episodes wasn't really about Family Guy at all. It was about the principle that even bad comedy deserves protection from censorship. Parker and Stone were simultaneously trashing Family Guy's writing while defending its right to say whatever it wanted. The episodes also took a shot at the show's fans, suggesting they were easily amused by random, disconnected humor and didn't expect or demand real comedic craft. What made the South Park attack particularly stinging for Family Guy fans was how specifically it targeted the cutaway gag format. The manatee metaphor was devastating because it implied that literally no human intelligence was required to produce the show's signature comedy device. Any random combination of words and ideas, selected by chance rather than craft, would produce the same result. Whether or not this criticism was fair, it resonated with a significant portion of the animation community and became a shorthand for the perceived laziness of Family Guy's comedy approach. To this day, when critics want to dismiss a joke as random or unearned, they reference the manatees. The Ren and Stimpy creator John Kricfalusi also weighed in with criticism of Family Guy, though from a different angle. Kricfalusi, known for his commitment to expressive, hand-drawn animation, expressed concern that the relatively simple animation style of Family Guy would negatively influence new generations of animators. He argued that the show's success proved you could attract a massive audience with minimal animation quality, which would discourage studios from investing in more artistically ambitious visual styles. This criticism was less about the show's humor and more about its impact on the craft of animation itself. Writer Chris Ware, the celebrated author of Jimmy Corrigan, the smartest kid on Earth, noticed similarities between his title character and Stewie Griffin that he felt were suspicious. Ware publicly remarked that the resemblances were a little too coincidental to be simply coincidental and expressed concern about his work being retroactively associated with a show that drew from it without attribution. The production company behind Family Guy insisted that Stewie was an entirely original creation, but Ware's comments added another voice to the ongoing conversation about the show's originality. The two shows eventually made peace, at least publicly, with the 2014 crossover episode The Simpsons Guy. The hour-long episode saw the Griffin family visiting Springfield and interacting with the Simpson family. Reviews were mixed. Some viewers appreciated the novelty of seeing the two casts together, while others felt the episode was underwhelming and lacked the bite of either show at its best. The episode did generate controversy of its own when Stewie made a prank call during the crossover that included a joke about sexual assault, prompting the Parents Television Council to write angry letters to both MacFarlane and Groening. The rivalry between these two shows ultimately says a lot about the ego and insecurity that can exist in the creative world. The Simpsons had been on the air for a decade before Family Guy showed up, and its writers clearly felt protective of their territory. MacFarlane, for his part, seemed unable to handle even mild criticism without escalating to extreme measures. The whole saga is a fascinating study in how competitive creative people can become when their originality is questioned, and how quickly friendly competition can turn ugly when one side decides to take things too far. Now let's go deeper into the iceberg and explore the getting deeper level, where we talk about the episodes that never should have existed, the ones that got banned, censored, and altered in ways that most fans have never seen. Let's get started. Family Guy has always pushed boundaries, but there are certain episodes that pushed so hard they broke through entirely. The most infamous example is Partial Terms of Endearment, an episode so controversial that it holds the distinction of being the only Family Guy episode that has never aired on American television. Not once. In over 25 years of the show's existence, Fox has refused to broadcast this episode, and even Adult Swim, which has aired virtually every other Family Guy episode including the most offensive ones, declined to show it. The episode was written by Danny Smith and directed by Joseph Lee. It was intended to be the finale of Season 8, airing in 2010. The story follows Lois being approached by an old college friend named Naomi who asks her to be a surrogate mother. After some discussion and resistance from Peter, Lois agrees and undergoes in vitro fertilization. But then the biological parents are killed in a car accident, leaving Lois pregnant with a baby that no longer has parents waiting for it. This sets up the central question of the episode. Should Lois get an abortion? The episode presented both sides of the abortion debate with what many critics actually praised as surprising nuance. Peter, in a typical comedic twist, ends up being swayed by the pro-life crowd, while Lois wrestles with the practical and ethical implications of carrying a baby to term under these circumstances. The episode ends with Peter turning to the camera and bluntly announcing that they had the abortion, cutting to credits immediately after. Fox's president at the time, Kevin Riley, defended his decision to ban the episode in an interview, explaining that abortion was simply too volatile a topic, especially given the economic climate at the time. Advertisers were already nervous, and the network didn't want to risk losing sponsors over what was essentially a cartoon about one of the most politically charged issues in America. MacFarlane pushed back publicly, arguing that there was nothing about abortion that should be treated differently from the show's episodes about gay marriage, oil spills, or any other controversial topic. What makes the ban particularly notable is that it was announced before Season 8 even aired. The Family Guy team revealed the episode's fate at the 2009 San Diego Comic-Con, essentially telling fans that an entire episode existed that they would never see on television. The episode was eventually made available through a special DVD release and has aired on BBC Three in the United Kingdom, where it was watched in just under 1 million homes. It was also omitted from Disney Plus when the streaming service added the Family Guy catalogue. Clips from the episode were shown during the special Family Guy 200 episodes later, where MacFarlane described it as the closest the writers had come to doing a modern-day All in the Family episode. Other producers called it a relatively balanced and intelligent discussion of a very difficult subject and claimed it wasn't controversial at all, which is an interesting position to take about the only episode your network has ever banned. Before partial terms of endearment, the dubious title of Family Guy's banned episode belonged to When You Wish Upon a Weinstein from Season 3. This episode was originally intended to air in 2000, but Fox pulled it at the last minute over concerns that the episode's humor could be perceived as anti-Semitic. The story involves Peter, frustrated by his financial mismanagement, wishing for a Jewish person to help him manage his money after seeing how well his neighbors are doing. He meets a man named Max Weinstein who helps him get his finances in order. The episode was a satire of Jewish stereotypes rather than an endorsement of them, but Fox was nervous about the public reaction. The episode was held back for years before finally airing on Adult Swim in 2003 and then on Fox in 2004. By that point, most people didn't see what the big deal was, and the episode is now considered a fairly tame entry in Family Guy's catalog of controversial content. The Turban Cowboy situation is perhaps the most disturbing censorship story in Family Guy's history, not because of what the episode contained, but because of the horrifying coincidence that surrounded it. The episode, which aired in March 2013, featured a cutaway gag in which Peter drives a car through the Boston Marathon, running over and killing multiple runners. It was the kind of dark, shock-value humor that Family Guy was known for. 1 month later, on April 15, 2013, the Boston Marathon bombing killed 3 people and injured hundreds more. The timing was so uncanny that conspiracy theorists immediately began claiming the show had somehow predicted the attack. Clips of the cutaway gag went viral on social media, with people combining different scenes from the episode to create a misleading video that made it appear as though the show had depicted both the car attack and an explosion. MacFarlane himself seemed disturbed by the coincidence and the conspiracy theories it spawned. The episode was essentially banned from television reruns and was pulled from streaming services entirely. It didn't reappear on Hulu until September 2022, nearly a decade later. Beyond these headline-grabbing examples, Family Guy has faced extensive censorship across different countries that has fundamentally altered the viewing experience depending on where you live. Various nations have developed completely different versions of the show based on their cultural standards, religious beliefs, and regulatory requirements. Episodes that air without issue in the United States can be heavily edited, partially broadcast, or completely banned in other markets. The show's approach to sensitive topics through its signature irreverent humor means that virtually every episode contains something that could offend someone, somewhere. Religious humor gets cut in countries with strong religious broadcasting standards. Violence gets toned down in nations with strict content regulations. Sexual content gets modified or removed in conservative markets. And topical humor about real people and events often gets altered based on local laws about defamation and public figure protections. What's especially interesting about Family Guy's censorship history is how the show has occasionally anticipated and even embraced its controversial reputation. The episode PTV from Season 4 was literally about Peter creating his own television network because the FCC had become too restrictive. The episode featured an elaborate musical number about all the things the FCC wouldn't let you say on television, which itself had to be censored for broadcast. It was the show's way of acknowledging that it existed in a constant state of tension with the gatekeepers of broadcast standards, and that this tension was actually a fundamental part of its identity. The censored versus uncensored versions of Family Guy episodes represent a whole hidden layer of content that most viewers have never seen. Fox broadcasts heavily edited versions of episodes that remove the most explicit content, but the DVD and streaming releases often include additional scenes, extended jokes, and uncensored dialogue that was deemed too risky for network television. In some cases, the differences are minor, a bleeped word replaced by the actual profanity. In other cases, entire scenes are included on the home release that never appeared on television. One of the most notable examples involves the episode Deep Throats, where Peter and Lois are found in a compromising position on the couch. The broadcast version shows them with underwear on. The uncensored version removes that small mercy and adds suggestive dialogue that makes the scene considerably more explicit. These dual versions of episodes create a strange situation where fans who only watch on network television are literally watching a different show than fans who consume the DVDs or certain streaming versions. The Stewie Airport security scene from early in the series became one of the most controversial moments in the show's history. In the original broadcast, Stewie sang a song to distract airport security while weapons passed through the luggage scanner. He then made a comment about a certain wanted individual using the same tactic. The scene was already controversial when it aired, but after September 11, 2001, it became completely unacceptable for reruns. The scene was pulled from syndication and removed from the Volume 1 DVD release. It has since resurfaced on some streaming platforms, but it remains one of the most heavily censored individual scenes in the show's history. The show has also run into problems with specific celebrity references. A cutaway showing the JFK assassination as a Pez dispenser was pulled from certain broadcasts. References to specific living public figures have been edited or removed in reruns when the individuals in question objected or when their circumstances changed. The show exists in a constant state of editorial flux, with different versions of episodes circulating depending on when and where you watch them. International censorship of Family Guy mirrors many of the same patterns seen with other American animated comedies, but the scale is particularly impressive given the show's global reach. In many countries, the show airs with significant cuts to violence, sexual content, and culturally sensitive material. Some markets receive episodes that are several minutes shorter than their American counterparts because so much content has been removed. In extreme cases, entire episodes are simply not broadcast because the proportion of objectionable content is too high to edit around. Now, let's take a dive deeper into the iceberg and explore the dark zone. Be sure to subscribe to our channel before we go on. Let's talk about the fan theories that attempt to explain the deeper mysteries of Family Guy, because some of these ideas will genuinely change how you see the show. The most widely discussed fan theory about Family Guy is the idea that everything we see in the show is actually happening inside Stewie Griffin's imagination. According to this theory, the events of Family Guy represent how an infant perceives the world around him, filtered through a baby's limited understanding and wild imagination. This theory was originally proposed by a Reddit user and has gained significant traction in the fan community because it actually explains several of the show's strangest inconsistencies. Think about it from this perspective. Brian Griffin can talk. Nobody finds this particularly unusual. He's treated as a full member of the family who can drive, drink, write books, and have romantic relationships with human women. Why would a dog be able to do all of this? According to the Stewie perception theory, it's because Stewie, as a baby, doesn't fully understand the difference between humans and the family pet. He grows up around Brian, sees Brian as a member of the family just like everyone else, and therefore imagines that Brian can talk and behave like a human. In Stewie's mind, everyone in the family communicates equally, so Brian naturally has full language abilities. This also explains one of the show's longest-running mysteries, why some characters can understand Stewie and others can't. In the earlier seasons, it seemed like nobody could hear Stewie's elaborate monologues about world domination. He would deliver these dramatic speeches, and everyone would just ignore him. But Brian always seemed to understand what Stewie was saying. According to the theory, Brian can communicate with Stewie because they're both making essentially nonsensical sounds. A baby and a dog are the two members of the family who can't actually speak English, so in Stewie's imagination, they naturally understand each other. The theory also explains why other characters are inconsistent in their ability to hear Stewie. Sometimes Lois responds to things he says, sometimes she doesn't. Sometimes Peter reacts, sometimes he's oblivious. In the framework of this theory, these inconsistencies reflect the natural confusion of a baby who sometimes feels like adults are listening to him and sometimes feels completely ignored. Any parent can tell you that babies do seem to have moments where they think they're communicating and moments where they realize nobody understands them. The characters themselves make more sense through this lens too. Peter and Chris act goofy and childish around Stewie, so Stewie perceives them as stupid buffoons. Lois is strict and controlling in the way all mothers seem to their babies, so Stewie sees her as his ultimate arch-nemesis that he must destroy. The over-the-top adventures, the impossible physics, the absurd situations, these are all the exaggerated fantasies of a baby who doesn't understand how the real world works and fills in the gaps with his own imagination. Some fans have even pointed out that Stewie can be seen playing with 1980s toys like He-Man and Lion-O figures, which could be hand-me-downs. This would explain why the show constantly references a decade that a baby born in the late 1990s would have no memory of. Stewie encounters these cultural artifacts through his older siblings' belongings and absorbs them into his imaginary world. There are counter-arguments to the Stewie perception theory, of course. The most obvious is that many episodes feature storylines that Stewie isn't present for and couldn't possibly be imagining. Peter's adventures at work, Lois's interactions with her parents, and the various subplots involving the neighbors all take place without Stewie anywhere in the scene. Defenders of the theory respond by pointing out that babies are present in the household far more than adults realize and that Stewie could be constructing these scenarios based on overheard conversations and fragments of information that he fills in with his imagination. The theory also provides an explanation for why the show's tone shifts so dramatically between episodes. Some episodes are heartfelt and emotionally grounded, while others are chaotic and nonsensical. If the show represents Stewie's mental state on any given day, these shifts make perfect sense. Babies have wildly fluctuating moods and attention spans. On days when Stewie is calm and observant, the show produces thoughtful episodes. On days when he's overstimulated or cranky, the show devolves into chaos. The inconsistency isn't a bug in the show's design. It's a feature of a baby's unpredictable inner world. Another compelling theory suggests that Brian Griffin is actually the one writing Family Guy as a show. This is what's known as a meta-theory because it operates on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. According to this idea, Brian, who we know is an aspiring novelist throughout the series, has been writing the events of Family Guy as an exaggerated, fictional version of his real family's life. This would explain several things. First, it explains why Brian is consistently portrayed as the voice of reason and the most sympathetically written character, especially in the earlier seasons. If Brian is the author, of course he's going to make himself look good. Second, it explains the flanderization of other characters over time. Brian started by writing relatively grounded stories, but when those didn't sell or generate interest, he made the stories more exaggerated and outlandish to attract a bigger audience. The characters became more extreme because Brian kept making them more extreme in his writing. The theory also explains why Brian appears in almost every major storyline. Even in episodes that don't focus on the whole family, Brian is almost always present. The road to episodes, which are consistently the show's most critically acclaimed installments, always feature Brian prominently alongside Stewie. If Brian is the author, he naturally inserts himself into the most important and exciting narratives. The strongest evidence for this theory comes from the episode Inside Family Guy from season 15, which literally presents the show as a fictional television series being produced by actors who play the Griffin family. The episode takes the form of a behind-the-scenes documentary about the making of Family Guy, complete with the cast breaking character and discussing their real lives. While this episode was played for comedy, it explicitly establishes within the Family Guy universe that the events we watch are a produced, scripted entertainment product rather than real events happening to real characters. One of the most popular and frequently cited theories is the multiverse theory, which attempts to explain why post-cancellation Family Guy feels so different from the original 3 seasons. According to this theory, the Family Guy we watch from season 4 onward doesn't take place in the same universe as seasons 1 through 3. Instead, when Brian and Stewie supposedly travel back in time to revisit the pilot episode in the season 10 episode Back to the Pilot, they actually travel to a parallel universe rather than going back in time. The evidence for this is compelling. In the pre-cancellation seasons, the characters are noticeably different. Meg is actually loved by her family and treated with basic respect. Peter is a bumbling but well-meaning father who genuinely cares about his family. Brian is a down-to-earth, reasonable voice of sanity. Stewie is a genuine villain with concrete plans for world domination and killing his mother. The humor is edgier than most animated comedies but is generally less extreme than what comes later. In the post-cancellation seasons, everything changes. Meg becomes the family's designated punching bag, subjected to emotional abuse and neglect that would constitute child welfare violations in the real world. Peter transforms from a lovable oaf into an actively destructive sociopath whose actions regularly endanger his family and community. Brian devolves from a thoughtful intellectual into a pretentious, insufferable hypocrite. And Stewie gradually loses his villainous edge and becomes more of a complex, emotionally vulnerable character. The theory suggests these aren't the same characters at all. They're parallel universe versions of the originals, similar enough to be recognizable but fundamentally different in temperament and behavior. The existence of the multiverse is confirmed within the show through the episode Road to the Multiverse, where Brian and Stewie literally travel to different versions of reality. If multiple universes exist, there's no reason the post-cancellation show couldn't be set in a different one. There's also a deeply unsettling theory about Peter Griffin's brain and his rapid cognitive decline throughout the series. In the early episodes, Peter is dumb but functional. He holds down a job, maintains relationships, and occasionally demonstrates unexpected moments of insight. By the later seasons, Peter's stupidity has become almost lethal, with him regularly causing destruction, forgetting basic facts, and behaving in ways that suggest genuine cognitive impairment rather than simple foolishness. According to this theory, Peter's brain is actually decaying over the course of the series, possibly due to the numerous head injuries he sustains or his excessive alcohol consumption. The show has explicitly addressed Peter's brain damage on multiple occasions, with episodes showing him suffering concussions, losing brain cells, and having objects literally lodged in his skull. If these injuries are taken at face value rather than as throwaway gags, they paint a disturbing picture of a man whose mental faculties are progressively deteriorating while everyone around him either doesn't notice or doesn't care. A similar theory applies to Brian and his alcoholism. One particularly thoughtful Reddit analysis argues that Brian's character degradation over the course of the series mirrors the real-world effects of long-term alcohol abuse. Brian is established as a heavy drinker from the very beginning, consuming martinis throughout the day and showing up intoxicated in numerous episodes. The theory suggests that his transformation from thoughtful intellectual to pretentious, hypocritical mess isn't flanderization at all. It's a realistic depiction of how alcoholism gradually erodes someone's judgment, relationships, and self-awareness. In the early seasons, Brian is sharp, empathetic, and socially aware. As his drinking progresses, he becomes more self-absorbed, less capable of maintaining healthy relationships, and increasingly out of touch with how others perceive him. His failed writing career, his disastrous romantic relationships, and his growing pretentiousness could all be symptoms of the cognitive and emotional deterioration that accompanies chronic alcoholism. It's a reading of the character that the writers almost certainly didn't intend, but it fits the evidence remarkably well. Then there's the theory about who Stewie's biological mother actually is, and this one gets really dark. According to a widely circulated theory based on evidence from multiple episodes, Meg Griffin might actually be Stewie's mother rather than his sister. The theory suggests that Meg became pregnant at a very young age after a relationship with a boyfriend. When the father disappeared, Lois and Brian conspired to convince Peter and Chris that the baby was Lois's, protecting Meg from the stigma of teen pregnancy and Peter from finding out about his daughter's sexual activity. The evidence is surprisingly robust. In the banned episode Partial Terms of Endearment, Lois makes a comment that Meg gave birth to Stewie. While this was presented as a throwaway joke, the theory suggests it might have been an accidental truth. Every flashback showing Stewie's birth carefully avoids showing the mother's face, which would be unnecessary if the mother was simply Lois. Peter and Chris have both demonstrated throughout the series that they're easily deceived, making it plausible that they would fall for such a scheme. And there's the age gap between Stewie and the other children. If Stewie is Meg's child rather than Lois's, it would explain why there's such a large gap between Chris, who appears to be around 13, and a baby, a gap that's unusual for a couple who apparently stopped having children and then randomly had another one. Now let's plunge into the deep waters of the Iceberg, where we explore the episodes that crossed every line and left viewers genuinely disturbed. Make sure you're subscribed before we go on. Family Guy has produced hundreds of episodes over its 25-plus-year run, and most of them follow the standard formula of irreverent humor, cutaway gags, and storylines that reset by the next episode. But there are certain episodes that stand apart from the rest because they venture into territory that feels genuinely uncomfortable, even for a show that prides itself on pushing boundaries. These are the episodes that make you question whether the writers went too far, and in some cases, whether certain topics should have been explored through comedy at all. Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q from Season 10, is widely considered one of the most controversial episodes in the show's entire run. The episode attempts something that Family Guy rarely does: it tries to be serious. The story centers on Quagmire's sister Brenda, who is in a violently abusive relationship with her boyfriend Jeff. The signs of abuse are impossible to miss. Brenda shows up with visible injuries, makes excuses for Jeff's behavior, and flinches at sudden movements. The concept of Family Guy doing a serious episode about domestic violence was bold but deeply problematic because of the characters involved. The main characters trying to save Brenda from her abuser are Peter and Quagmire, neither of whom are exactly paragons of virtue. Peter has been emotionally abusive toward his own family for years, particularly toward Meg. And Quagmire is a character whose entire existence revolves around sexual predation, ignoring consent, and treating women as objects. Having these two characters position themselves as heroes who care about violence against women created a massive thematic dissonance that the episode never successfully addresses. The episode's solution to the domestic violence problem makes things even worse. Rather than showing Brenda finding the strength to leave her abuser, or showing the characters connecting her with resources and support, the guys simply decide to murder Jeff. They discuss how in the old days, killing an abuser was considered morally righteous, and then they carry out the plan. Jeff is killed, and Brenda is left alone, pregnant, and grief-stricken, still not fully understanding what happened to her. The show presents this as a happy ending, but Brenda's situation hasn't actually improved in any meaningful way. She hasn't healed from her trauma, doesn't know her brother murdered her boyfriend, and is now a single mother without a support system. The 150th episode, Brian and Stewie, took a completely different approach to darkness. This was a bottle episode, meaning it took place entirely in a single location with just two characters. Brian and Stewie get locked in a bank vault over a weekend and are forced to spend the entire time together. What makes this episode remarkable is that it contains no cutaway gags at all, which is practically unheard of for Family Guy. It's just two characters talking. The episode deals with some genuinely heavy themes. Stewie has to eat Brian's poop to avoid starvation, which is as grotesque as it sounds and was the part that drew the most complaints from viewers and the Parents' Television Council. But the real emotional weight comes later when Brian reveals that he keeps a gun in the vault specifically for the purpose of ending his own life if things ever get bad enough. He and Stewie have an extended, sincere conversation about depression, meaning, and why Brian continues living despite feeling like his life is ultimately pointless. This was one of the rare moments where Family Guy dropped its comedy armor entirely and attempted to have a genuine dramatic conversation about mental health. Whether it succeeded or not is debatable, but the attempt itself was notable for a show that usually uses humor to deflect from any real emotional engagement. Fresh Air from Season 12 is often cited as the single worst episode of Family Guy by fans and critics alike. The episode features Peter becoming increasingly attracted to his own son Chris after Chris inherits Carter Peuterschmidt's fortune. Peter's fixation on Chris escalates throughout the episode, culminating in Peter actually attempting to marry his own son to gain access to the inheritance. The incest overtones are impossible to ignore and are played for comedy in a way that made even devoted Family Guy fans deeply uncomfortable. What makes Fresh Air particularly disturbing isn't just the subject matter but how casually it's treated. The show doesn't frame Peter's behavior as horrifying or present it as a cautionary tale. It's just another wacky Family Guy adventure where Peter does something terrible and faces no consequences. The episode received some of the lowest audience scores in the show's history and is frequently listed as one of the worst episodes of any animated comedy series. Road to the North Pole, the show's Christmas special from Season 9, took the beloved road to format and turned it into something genuinely unsettling. Stewie and Brian travel to the North Pole to confront Santa Claus, but what they find isn't the jolly workshop of Christmas legends. Instead, they discover that Santa is gravely ill, his elves are deformed and suffering, and the entire operation is on the verge of collapse because the demands of modern Christmas have become too great. When Stewie and Brian attempt to deliver presents in Santa's place, they botch the job spectacularly. They break into a house and end up brutally injuring the family inside, culminating in a genuinely disturbing sequence where they accidentally kill the family's pets and leave the house looking like a crime scene. The violence is graphic enough that it stands out even by Family Guy's standards, and the juxtaposition of Christmas cheer with genuine horror creates an atmosphere that's more creepy than funny. The death of Cecil Pritchfield in the episode Send in Stewie, Please is another episode that crossed significant lines. In this episode, Stewie visits a child psychologist played by Ian McKellen, and through their session, reveals genuine vulnerability about his identity and insecurities. It's one of the most emotionally honest episodes in the show's history. But then the psychologist has a heart attack and asks Stewie to pass him his heart medicine. Stewie refuses and lets the man die specifically to prevent anyone from knowing that he opened up emotionally. Watching Stewie calmly allow someone to die to protect his emotional walls is chilling in a way that most Family Guy moments aren't. The episode Herpy the Love Saw from Season 12 managed to combine gross-out humor with genuinely disturbing implications. In this episode, Stewie contracts herpes from Brian after the two become blood brothers. The story alone is uncomfortable, but the show doubles down with graphic visuals of Stewie's facial sores that are genuinely difficult to look at. The episode features close-up shots of pus-leaking blisters that cross the line from cartoon exaggeration into territory that feels almost medically accurate in its grotesqueness. The fact that an adult character essentially gave a sexually transmitted infection to a baby, even through a non-sexual mechanism, adds a layer of disturbing subtext that the episode never adequately addresses. The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire episode from Season 4 featured one of the show's most controversial musical moments. Peter appears with a barbershop quartet to deliver a man's medical diagnosis through song and dance, cheerfully informing him about a life-threatening condition in an upbeat musical number. AIDS organizations protested the song and its content, but the show's creators admitted in the DVD commentary that the joke was deliberately designed to be as tasteless as possible. The fact that they acknowledged the cruelty while choosing to air it anyway says everything about Family Guy's approach to boundary-pushing comedy. The episode Chick Cancer showed Stewie at his most sociopathic when he reconnects with his childhood friend Olivia Fuller. Their relationship deteriorates, and Stewie's response is to burn down Olivia's house, apparently killing her and her new boyfriend. The scene where the building burns while Stewie watches with satisfaction is played straight, without the comedic framing that usually cushions the show's violent moments. It's a rare instance where Stewie's capacity for violence feels genuinely menacing rather than cartoonishly amusing. Family Guy from Season 7 generated controversy for its premise alone. Peter participates in a medical experiment and receives an injection that makes him gay. The episode was criticized by both conservative groups who objected to the show's treatment of homosexuality and by LGBTQ advocates who felt the portrayal was reductive and harmful. The idea that sexual orientation can be induced or reversed through a simple injection was seen as perpetuating dangerous misconceptions, regardless of the comedic context. The Quagmire's Dad episode from Season 8 dealt with Quagmire's father coming out as transgender and transitioning to become a woman named Ida. The episode generated enormous controversy for its portrayal of transgender identity, particularly a scene where Brian discovers he had been intimate with Ida without knowing about her transition and responds by vomiting extensively. Trans advocacy groups condemned the scene as transphobic, arguing that it framed intimacy with a transgender person as inherently disgusting. The show's defenders argued that Brian's reaction was about the surprise rather than about Ida's identity, but the scene was widely seen as punching down at an already marginalized community. Now let's talk about the abyss level of our iceberg. Let's discuss what is arguably the most incredible real-life story connected to Family Guy. The time Seth MacFarlane was supposed to be on one of the planes that hit the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. This isn't a fan theory or a conspiracy. This is a verified, well-documented fact that MacFarlane has confirmed in numerous interviews over the years. On the morning of September 11, 2001, Seth MacFarlane was booked on American Airlines Flight 11, departing from Boston's Logan International Airport to Los Angeles. This was the first plane to be hijacked that morning. At 8:46 a.m., it was flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, killing all 92 people on board and hundreds more in the building. MacFarlane wasn't on the plane. The reason he survived is almost absurdly mundane. The night before, he had been at his alma mater, the Rhode Island School of Design, giving a lecture. Afterward, he went out for drinks with some of the faculty. He had a few too many and woke up the next morning hungover. Compounding the problem, his travel agent had given him the wrong departure time, listing the flight as leaving at 8:15 a.m. when it was actually scheduled for 7:45 a.m. The combination of the hangover and the incorrect itinerary meant MacFarlane arrived at Logan Airport about 10 minutes too late to board. He has described the moment in vivid detail in multiple interviews. He got to the counter and told them he was booked on Flight 11. The woman behind the counter told him he was too late, that they had already closed the gate. MacFarlane asked to be put on the next available flight and went to the airport lounge to sleep off his hangover. About 45 minutes later, he was awakened by a commotion. The first plane had hit the World Trade Center. He sat there and watched as the second plane struck the South Tower on the television screens in the lounge. When they announced which flight had hit the North Tower, MacFarlane turned to the person sitting next to him and said he had been booked on that flight. He had been late. He had missed it. The emotional aftermath was significant but, according to MacFarlane, not as life-altering as you might expect. He described the experience as rattling for the first few weeks but said he didn't dwell on it for long. When asked whether the near-death experience made him feel like he was supposed to die that day, or whether he now felt like he was on borrowed time, MacFarlane gave a characteristically pragmatic answer. He said he'd missed other flights for the same reason and that he wasn't much of a fate person. He attributed the whole thing to coincidence rather than destiny, which is a remarkably calm perspective for someone who was literally minutes away from dying in one of the worst terrorist attacks in human history. MacFarlane wasn't even the only notable person who narrowly avoided Flight 11 that day. Actor Mark Wahlberg was also booked on the same plane but changed his plans at the last minute to fly to the Toronto Film Festival on a private charter instead. Wahlberg later made controversial comments suggesting that if he had been on the plane, things would have gone differently, implying he would have fought the hijackers. MacFarlane, by contrast, never made any such claims. The implications of MacFarlane's near miss for popular culture are staggering when you think about them. If MacFarlane had arrived at the airport on time and boarded Flight 11, Family Guy would have been cancelled permanently with only 3 seasons in the can. There would have been no revival, no Adult Swim explosion, no record-breaking DVD sales. The show would have ended as a cult oddity that never reached its full potential. Beyond Family Guy, MacFarlane's death would have erased a significant portion of modern entertainment. American Dad, which premiered in 2005, would never have existed. The Cleveland Show would never have been created. The Ted films, which grossed hundreds of millions at the box office, would never have been made. The Orville, MacFarlane's science fiction series, would never have existed. His Grammy-nominated album of classic standards would never have been recorded. His hosting of the Academy Awards would never have happened. Family Guy was in the middle of its 3rd season when 9/11 occurred. The first episode to air after the attacks was A Fish Out of Water, which broadcast on September 19, 2001, just 8 days after the tragedy. If MacFarlane had died, this episode almost certainly would have been dedicated to his memory, and the remaining third season episodes would likely have been the final chapters of the series. The relationship between Family Guy and 9/11 extends beyond MacFarlane's personal brush with death. The show has referenced the attacks numerous times throughout its run, sometimes in ways that generated additional controversy. The Turban Cowboy situation, which we discussed earlier, is the most extreme example, but there have been other instances where the show's willingness to joke about terrorism has drawn criticism and concern. What's particularly fascinating about MacFarlane's near miss is how little it seems to have changed his overall approach to life and work. You might expect someone who came within minutes of dying in a terrorist attack to undergo a profound philosophical transformation, to reassess their priorities, to develop a new appreciation for the fragility of life. But MacFarlane, by his own account, simply continued doing what he was already doing. He kept making cartoons, kept pushing boundaries, and kept approaching his work with the same irreverent sensibility that defined Family Guy from the beginning. There's something almost fitting about the fact that the man who created one of television's most nihilistic, consequence-free comedy universes responded to a genuine brush with death by essentially shrugging and getting back to work. It's very much in character with the show he created, where characters survive impossible disasters, suffer no lasting consequences, and reset to their default state by the next episode. MacFarlane's real life, in this one extraordinary instance, actually mirrored the logic of his fictional world. The flight that MacFarlane was supposed to be on, American Airlines Flight 11, also carried David Angel and his wife Lynn. Angel was a television producer best known as co-creator and executive producer of the NBC sitcom Frasier, the very show whose ratings competition had contributed to Family Guy's first cancellation. The tragic irony that the producer of the show that helped kill Family Guy died on the same flight that Family Guy's creator narrowly missed is the kind of darkly coincidental detail that feels like it belongs in a Family Guy cutaway gag rather than real life. The attack had a lasting impact on the entertainment industry as a whole, and Family Guy was not exempt from the cultural shifts that followed. The show's approach to political and social commentary became more pointed in the post-9/11 era, with episodes increasingly tackling war, terrorism, and American foreign policy. MacFarlane's own political views, which lean progressive, became more explicitly expressed through characters like Brian, who served as a mouthpiece for liberal perspectives on issues ranging from gun control to military intervention. The show's willingness to joke about terrorism after having its own creator narrowly escape an act of terror has been both praised as courageous and criticized as insensitive. MacFarlane has spoken about the tension between wanting to address serious topics through comedy and recognizing that some subjects carry a weight that comedy alone cannot bear. His personal connection to the events of 9/11 adds a layer of complexity to every joke the show has made about terrorism, airline security, and American foreign policy since that day. There's also a fascinating alternate history question that fans and historians have explored. If MacFarlane had died on the 9th of November, the trajectory of adult animation in America would have been fundamentally different. The Simpsons would have remained the dominant force in animated comedy without the competitive pressure that Family Guy applied. South Park would have continued as the primary alternative, but without Family Guy occupying the middle ground between The Simpsons' relative restraint and South Park's extreme irreverence, the entire landscape of the genre would have evolved differently. Shows that were directly or indirectly influenced by Family Guy's success, including Bob's Burgers, Archer, and Rick and Morty, might never have found their audiences or might have taken significantly different creative directions. Moving deeper still into the iceberg, let's talk about the characters that make Family Guy one of the most morally complex, and some would argue morally bankrupt, shows on television. The ones that would never be allowed in a show created today. Herbert the Pervert is arguably the most controversial recurring character in modern television. He's an elderly man who lives in the Griffin family's neighborhood and is openly, transparently attracted to underage boys, particularly Chris Griffin. His every appearance involves him making inappropriate comments about children, attempting to lure them into situations where he can be alone with them, and displaying behavior that, in the real world, would immediately result in arrest and imprisonment. The show treats Herbert almost entirely as a source of comedy. His wheezy voice, his decrepit appearance, and his transparent attempts at seduction are all played for laughs. There's even a running dynamic where Chris seems oblivious to Herbert's true intentions, creating comedy from the dramatic irony of the audience knowing something the character doesn't. In some episodes, Herbert is even given sympathetic backstory, including a revelation that he's a World War II veteran who fought against actual Nazis. There's an extended storyline where he battles a former Nazi prison guard to save Chris, framing him as a flawed but ultimately heroic figure. The existence of Herbert raises uncomfortable questions about how comedy can normalize harmful behavior. Every time Herbert appears on screen making jokes about his attraction to children, the show is asking its audience to laugh at a situation that, in reality, represents one of the most serious crimes imaginable. The defense has always been that Herbert is a satirical character who exposes the absurdity of a community that would allow such a person to roam freely around children. But that defense becomes harder to maintain when the show gives Herbert sympathetic moments and treats his predatory behavior as a quirky personality trait rather than a genuine threat. What makes Herbert even more unsettling is the implication that his behavior has apparently been going on for decades without any consequences. The residents of Quahog know who he is and what he does, and yet nobody calls the police, nobody moves their children away from him, and nobody takes any action to protect the kids in the neighborhood. This is either a commentary on how communities often ignore the warning signs of predatory behavior, or it's the show treating a serious crime as an ongoing joke. The answer probably depends on how charitable you want to be toward the writer's intentions. The show has attempted to add depth to Herbert on several occasions, most notably in the episode German Guy, where Herbert is revealed as a World War II veteran who fought against the Nazis. He battles an actual former Nazi officer named Franz Gutentag who has been posing as a puppet store owner to get close to Chris. The episode positions Herbert as a genuine hero who saves Chris from a real monster, but it also creates the uncomfortable dynamic of asking audiences to root for a character whose own predatory behavior is no less real than the villain he's fighting. The episode seems to suggest that there's a hierarchy of evil and that Herbert's behavior, while wrong, is somehow less bad than being an actual Nazi. This moral calculus is deeply problematic and reflects the show's tendency to use moral relativism as a justification for keeping troublesome characters around. Herbert was voiced by Mike Henry until Henry's departure from some of his roles. The character's distinctive wheezy voice and slow delivery became one of the show's most recognizable elements, and his catchphrase of asking if anyone wants a popsicle became a dark running joke in the fan community. Despite the obvious concerns about the character, Herbert merchandise, including action figures and t-shirts, has been produced and sold alongside more innocuous Family Guy products, further blurring the line between acknowledging a character's darkness and profiting from it. Quagmire presents a similar but arguably even more disturbing case. Glenn Quagmire is one of the most popular characters in the entire series, beloved for his catchphrase giggity and his enthusiastic approach to life. But when you actually catalogue his behavior across the series, what emerges is a portrait of a serial predator who commits crimes in virtually every episode he appears in. He has explicitly ignored consent on numerous occasions. He has used substances to incapacitate women. He has admitted to illegal acts involving minors. He has engaged in voyeurism, stalking, and harassment as regular hobbies. The show knows exactly what Quagmire is. In the episode Quagmire's Quagmire, he meets a woman named Sonia who is even more aggressive and abusive than he is, giving him a taste of his own medicine. But the episode doesn't lead to any lasting character growth. By the next episode, Quagmire is back to his old behavior, having apparently learned nothing from the experience. The show seems to suggest that predatory behavior is just part of who Quagmire is, an unchangeable character trait rather than a pattern of criminal behavior that should have consequences. What makes this especially problematic is the episode where Quagmire waits for Meg to turn 18 and immediately attempts to sleep with her. He had literally been counting down to the day when Peter's daughter would be legally old enough for him to pursue. The fact that he's approximately 61 years old and has known Meg since she was a child makes this behavior especially disturbing. The episode does ultimately end with Peter standing up for Meg and Lois threatening Quagmire with violence if he ever goes near her again, but the fact that the show created this scenario in the first place says a lot about how far it's willing to push its characters into morally reprehensible territory. Meg Griffin's treatment throughout the series deserves special attention because it represents one of the most sustained campaigns of character abuse in television history. In the early seasons, Meg was a relatively normal teenage girl dealing with the typical anxieties of adolescence. She was insecure, eager for acceptance, and occasionally annoying in the way that all teenagers can be. But as the series progressed, Meg became the target of escalating cruelty from her own family. Peter regularly tells Meg to shut up, physically assaults her, forgets she exists, and actively excludes her from family activities. Lois, who should theoretically be Meg's strongest advocate, often participates in the abuse or fails to stop it. Chris is dismissive of her. Even Brian, the supposed voice of reason, treats Meg with contempt. The family's treatment of Meg has included physical violence, emotional abuse, sexual humiliation, and genuine neglect that, in a realistic context, would constitute a child welfare emergency. The show occasionally attempts to address Meg's treatment, most notably in the episode Seahorse Seashell Party where Meg finally confronts her family about their abuse. But the episode ends with Meg choosing to continue being the family's punching bag because she realizes they need someone to take out their frustrations on. This conclusion was widely criticized because it essentially told viewers that abuse victims should accept their role as targets for the sake of family harmony, a genuinely harmful message. The Meg situation becomes even more uncomfortable when you consider how the voice casting has evolved. Lacey Chabot originally voiced Meg in the first season before being replaced by Mila Kunis starting with the revival. The show has actually made jokes about this recasting, with Peter at one point commenting that Meg sounds different and another character replying that it doesn't matter because nobody listens to her anyway. The meta joke about the voice actress being replaceable perfectly mirrors how the character is treated within the show itself. There's also an argument to be made that Meg's treatment has gotten worse over time specifically because the writers have run out of other ways to generate humor from her character. In the early seasons, Meg's storylines involved typical teenage anxieties like wanting to be popular, having crushes, and dealing with social awkwardness. These were relatable situations that gave her dimension as a character. But as the show's humor became more extreme, the writers seemingly decided that the funniest thing about Meg was how much everyone hated her, and her character was gradually reduced to nothing more than a target for abuse. Some episodes have pushed this to genuinely disturbing extremes, including storylines where Meg develops Stockholm Syndrome toward her own family and where her attempts to stand up for herself are treated as the punchline rather than the setup. The Cleveland show represents another controversial chapter in Family Guy's character history. When Cleveland Brown got his own spin-off in 2009, it raised immediate questions about representation. The show featured a predominantly black cast but was created by white writers and, at the time, had its lead character voiced by white actor Mike Henry. The Cleveland show ran for 4 seasons before being cancelled in 2013, and its reception was mixed at best. Many critics felt that the show lacked the comedic energy of Family Guy and that its attempts to center black characters felt superficial when the creative team behind them was predominantly white. The recasting of Cleveland's voice in 2020 was part of a broader reckoning within the animation industry about racial representation in voice acting. While Henry's decision to step down was generally praised, it also raised questions about why it took 2 decades and massive social pressure for anyone involved in the production to recognize the problem. The transition to Arif Zahir as the new voice of Cleveland was handled relatively smoothly, with Zahir delivering a performance that honored the character while bringing his own interpretation to the role. Brian Griffin's death and resurrection in Season 12 is one of the most controversial storylines in the show's history, and it says a lot about the relationship between the show's creators and its audience. In the episode Life of Brian, which aired on November 24, 2013, Brian is struck by a car and dies. The episode treated his death with unusual seriousness, showing the Griffin family grieving in a way that felt genuine and heartfelt. Stewie, who had recently destroyed his time machine, was unable to travel back and prevent the accident. The family quickly adopted a replacement dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico of Sopranos fame. Vinny was charming and funny in a completely different way from Brian, but fans were devastated by the loss. Within hours of the episode airing, a petition directed at Seth MacFarlane and Fox demanding Brian's return collected over 100,000 signatures. The internet exploded with grief, anger, and demands for the show to undo what it had done. The backlash was so intense that MacFarlane and the writers were reportedly surprised by the reaction. MacFarlane later stated that they were all very surprised, in a good way, that people still cared enough about the character to be that angry. They had expected the death to create a small stir, but the level of rage exceeded anything they had anticipated. 2 episodes later, in the Christmas episode, Stewie found a way to travel back in time and save Brian, erasing the entire death storyline as though it had never happened. MacFarlane tweeted afterward, asking if people really thought they would permanently kill off Brian, adding that they would have to be a particular kind of impaired to do something like that. Many fans found the whole thing frustrating, viewing it as a manipulative publicity stunt designed to generate buzz and ratings rather than a genuine creative choice. The 3-episode arc drew 6.37 million viewers for the Christmas episode alone, suggesting that the controversy did exactly what it was designed to do. The Brian death saga is fascinating because it exposed the parasocial relationships that viewers had developed with an animated character over more than a decade. People weren't just upset about a plot twist in a cartoon. They were genuinely grieving a character they felt they knew personally. The petition to bring Brian back collected over 100,000 signatures in a matter of hours, and social media was flooded with emotional tributes, angry rants, and heartfelt confessions about what the character meant to fans. Some viewers reported actually crying during the death scene, which is remarkable given that Family Guy is a show that usually goes out of its way to undermine any genuine emotional moment with a joke. The introduction of Vinny as Brian's replacement added insult to injury for many fans. Tony Sirico, who voiced the character, brought genuine charm to the role, and Vinny had a completely different energy from Brian. His Italian-American characterization, his street-smart attitude, and his rapport with Stewie offered a genuinely interesting alternative dynamic. But fans weren't interested in an alternative. They wanted Brian back, and the show's decision to move on so quickly from the death, with the family essentially forgetting about Brian within a single episode, felt dismissive of both the character and the audience's emotional investment. In retrospect, the Brian death arc represents one of the most significant experiments in Family Guy's history. It proved that the show still had the power to generate massive cultural conversation and genuine emotional responses from its audience, even in its 12th season. It also demonstrated the limits of how far the show could push its audience before the backlash became too intense. The fact that Brian was brought back so quickly suggests that the writers either always planned the resurrection or realized very quickly that they had made a mistake they needed to correct. Either way, the whole saga became one of the most talked about moments in animated television history and cemented Brian's status as one of the most beloved characters in the Family Guy universe. Now let's descend into the forbidden depths of the iceberg, where we explore the darkest fan theories about Family Guy. The ones that suggest the show we've been watching for over 2 decades is hiding something much more disturbing beneath its surface. Subscribe to our channel before we go deeper. The darkest and most widely known fan theory about Family Guy is the Peter's coma theory, which suggests that the entire show takes place inside Peter Griffin's mind as he lies in a hospital bed, having lost touch with reality following the tragic deaths of his family. According to this theory, the real-world version of the Griffin family experienced a series of devastating tragedies. Meg, who in reality was beautiful and popular, formed a close bond with Chris, who suffered from intellectual disabilities due to lack of oxygen at birth. One night, Meg drove home intoxicated from a party with Chris in the car, resulting in a fatal accident that killed them both. Devastated by the loss of 2 of her children, Lois fell into a deep depression and ultimately took her own life while pregnant with Stewie. Peter, having lost his wife and all 3 of his children, suffered a complete psychological break and retreated into a fantasy world inside his own mind. Everything we see in Family Guy is this fantasy, Peter's desperate attempt to create a reality where his family is still alive and together. The theory explains virtually every aspect of the show that seems strange or inconsistent. Meg is treated terribly because Peter carries guilt and anger toward her for the car accident that started the chain of events. But he can't bring himself to remove her from his fantasy entirely because he still loves her, which is why occasional episodes show Peter demonstrating genuine care for Meg despite usually treating her badly. Chris is depicted as dim because Peter's real Chris had intellectual disabilities. But in Peter's fantasy, Chris can function normally and even has moments of surprising insight, representing Peter's hope for what his son might have become. Stewie never got the chance to be born, so Peter imagines him as the most extraordinary baby possible. Ridiculously intelligent, full of potential, capable of building time machines and speaking multiple languages. He represents everything Stewie might have become if he'd had the chance to live. Stewie's early desire to kill Lois is a reflection of Peter's subconscious anger toward her for taking her own life and taking their unborn child with her. Brian represents the intellectual side of Peter that he never got to express. In reality, Peter is intelligent, but he sees himself as an idiot because he believes he failed as a father and husband. So he channels his intelligence into the family dog, who serves as the voice of reason and the character most capable of seeing the truth in any situation. Peter's friends, Cleveland and Quagmire, are based on real people who visit him in the hospital. They also tell him about their neighbor Joe, whom Peter has never met. Since Joe is described as a strong, heroic family man, Peter incorporates him into his fantasy as the father and husband he wishes he could have been. Cleveland eventually gets his own spin-off show in Peter's imagination when the real Cleveland takes a break from visiting because he's starting to lose touch with reality himself from spending too much time in Peter's fantasy world. The theory even explains why everything always works out for the Griffin family despite the incredible danger they face. Peter can't bear to let anything permanently bad happen to his family again, so no matter how dire the situation gets, everything always resets to normal by the next episode. The one thing Peter can give his family in his fantasy that he couldn't give them in real life is safety and permanence. A variation of this theory suggests that the characters aren't in Peter's head but are actually in hell, being punished for sins they committed in their previous lives. According to this version, each character's situation represents a form of ironic torment perfectly tailored to their specific transgressions. Stewie is an evil genius trapped in the body of a helpless infant, unable to execute any of his plans despite having the intellect to conceive them. Lois is a wealthy, popular socialite trapped in a loveless, money-strapped marriage to a man far below her station. Brian is a holier-than-thou intellectual trapped in the body of a literal animal, unable to be taken seriously no matter how right he is. Peter is a childish man-child perpetually stuck in a state of arrested development, unable to grow up or take responsibility for anything. Some versions of this theory include Chris and Meg as former bullies who are now trapped as exactly the kinds of kids they used to torment. Chris is stupid and overweight, the stereotypical target of school bullies. Meg is ugly, unpopular, and constantly humiliated, everything a popular girl might have used to mock others. The more charitable versions of the theory suggest the characters are in purgatory rather than hell, and that they can eventually grow past their sins and move on. Fans who support this version point to Stewie's gradual shift from evil to merely mischievous as evidence that character growth is possible within this punishment framework. The theory that Family Guy is a fictional television show within the American Dad universe has surprisingly strong evidence behind it. American Dad, also created by Seth MacFarlane, has made multiple references to Family Guy as a television program rather than a parallel reality. Steve Smith has been shown watching Family Guy episodes. Roger has dressed up as Stewie for Halloween. And in one particularly telling moment, Stan Smith listed his favorite fictional dogs, explicitly naming Brian Griffin as one of them. If Brian is fictional within the American Dad universe, then Family Guy must be a show that the characters of American Dad watch on television. The Inside Family Guy episode from season 15 supports this interpretation from the other direction. The episode presents itself as a behind-the-scenes documentary about the production of Family Guy, complete with actors breaking character and discussing their roles. If Family Guy is a show being produced by actors, then it exists as entertainment content within its own universe, which would be consistent with it being a television show that American Dad characters can watch and reference. One of the stranger theories involves Joe Swanson, who is voiced by Patrick Warburton. Warburton is also known for playing the Tick, a superhero character from a 2001 Fox series. The theory suggests that Joe Swanson is actually the Tick in retirement. Both characters share the same voice, a muscular frame, a large chin, and a dramatic, over-the-top personality. The theory proposes that the Tick was injured in the line of duty, paralyzing him from the waist down, and retired to Quahog under his civilian identity as Joe Swanson. His occasional displays of superhuman strength and his tendency toward dramatic heroic declarations are remnants of his former superhero life leaking through his civilian facade. Another deeply strange theory concerns Quagmire's true nature. Some fans have theorized that Quagmire isn't fully human but is instead some kind of supernatural entity, possibly an incubus, a demon from folklore that seduces people in their sleep. The evidence includes his seemingly supernatural stamina and his ability to appear literally anywhere at any time. His aging is inconsistent, with his stated age varying wildly across different episodes. He has survived situations that should be fatal and has demonstrated physical abilities that defy explanation. If Quagmire is an incubus operating in the mortal world, it would explain his insatiable appetites, his lack of any real consequences for his behavior, and his ability to charm people despite being transparently awful. The CIA brain transplant theory attempts to explain Brian's intelligence by connecting him to American Dad's backstory. In American Dad, the character Klaus is a German Olympic athlete whose brain was implanted into a goldfish by the CIA. If these two shows share the same universe, it's entirely possible that Brian is the result of a similar CIA experiment, a human brain transplanted into a dog's body. This would explain why Brian can talk, why he's attracted to human women, why he was the only puppy in his litter to behave like a person, and how he was able to father a 13-year-old human son. It would also explain his existential crisis and perpetual sense of not fitting in, since he's literally a human consciousness trapped in an animal body. The D.A. Boom canon theory is one of the more creative ideas floating around the fan community. In the Season 2 episode D.A. Boom, the world is destroyed by nuclear weapons following a Y2K catastrophe. Stewie mutates into a tentacle creature, and the family has to survive in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The episode ends with the revelation that the entire thing was supposedly a dream sequence. But some fans believe D.A. Boom actually happened within the Family Guy canon and that every subsequent episode takes place in the collective delusion of the surviving characters. The increasingly absurd and disconnected nature of post-Season 2 episodes is evidence, according to this theory, that the characters are slowly losing their grip on reality in the aftermath of nuclear annihilation. The financial mystery theory tries to solve one of the show's most persistent plot holes. How does the Griffin family afford their lifestyle? Peter has been fired from or quit numerous jobs throughout the series. He worked at a toy factory, as a fisherman, at a brewery, and in various other positions, none of which would provide the income necessary to support a family of 5 in a detached home in Rhode Island. The theory suggests that Stewie's modeling career, which has been referenced in several episodes, is actually the family's primary source of income. Stewie has the ego, the looks, and the intelligence to maintain a successful modeling career, and his vanity would prevent him from sharing credit with anyone else in the family. Peter, being the terrible father that he is, simply takes advantage of his infant son's earnings without acknowledging where the money comes from. Another fascinating theory involves Lois and her relationship with Peter. According to this theory, Lois is not the devoted wife she appears to be but is actually in the process of slowly leaving Peter. The evidence includes her increasingly negative behavior in later seasons, her multiple affairs with other characters including Bill Clinton and various men throughout the series, and the growing frequency with which she expresses frustration and contempt toward Peter. The theory suggests that Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's wealthy father who has always despised Peter, is manipulating Lois with money to encourage her to leave the marriage. Some fans point to the shift in tone of Lois's character across seasons as evidence that she's gradually building the courage and resources to walk away from Peter entirely. There's even a theory that attempts to explain the cutaway gags themselves. According to this theory, the cutaways aren't random jokes but are actually Peter's ADHD or attention deficit disorder manifesting in real time. Peter's brain is constantly making random associations and connections, jumping from whatever is happening in the present moment to some tangentially related memory or fantasy. The reason cutaways happen more frequently in later seasons is because Peter's condition has worsened over time, possibly due to the brain damage from his numerous head injuries. This would also explain why other characters occasionally trigger cutaways, as they've spent so much time around Peter that his pattern of thinking has become contagious. There's even a theory that Stewie funds the Griffin family's lifestyle through a secret modeling career. The family's financial situation has never made much sense. Peter works at a brewery and has been fired and rehired from numerous jobs, yet the family maintains a nice home and a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. The theory suggests that Stewie, who has been shown on multiple occasions to be vain and image-conscious, has been earning money as a baby model on the side. Given Stewie's ego and his demonstrated intelligence in financial matters, it's plausible that he would leverage his appearance for income while keeping the arrangement secret from his family. Now let's descend to the void, the level of the iceberg, where we examine the real-world controversies that have surrounded Family Guy behind the scenes. The stuff that happened off-screen that's just as dramatic as anything in the show itself. Family Guy has been involved in numerous legal battles throughout its history, with various individuals and organizations taking the show to court over its content. One of the most notable lawsuits involved actress and comedian Carol Burnett, who sued the show in 2006 over gags in the episode Peterotica that depicted her as a cleaning woman in a pornographic bookstore. The show also used Burnett's signature closing theme music in the scene. Burnett's lawsuit alleged defamation and copyright infringement, arguing that the show had used her likeness and theme song in a degrading context without her permission. She ultimately lost the case, with the court ruling that the use constituted protected parody. The Bourne Company filed a lawsuit in October 2007 over a song parody in the previously controversial When You Wish Upon a Weinstein episode. The company claimed that the episode's parody of a well-known song crossed the line from protected satire into anti-Semitic commentary. They also lost their case, with the court finding that the parody was legally defensible. Magician Art Metronome took the show to court in 2008 over a cutaway gag in Stewie Griffin, the untold story that showed Jesus Christ performing a hand gesture routine that Metronome claimed was plagiarized from his own act. This case was eventually settled out of court in 2010, suggesting that the production team saw enough merit in Metronome's claim to avoid a public ruling. The Parents Television Council has been Family Guy's most persistent and vocal critic since the show premiered in 1999. The PTC is a conservative watchdog organization that monitors television content and files complaints with the FCC about programming it deems inappropriate. Family Guy has appeared on the PTC's list of worst primetime shows for family viewing on their 2000, 2005, and 2006 lists, with over 40 individual episodes flagged as the worst TV show of the week. The PTC's complaints have covered a wide range of offenses including profanity, animated nudity, violence, sexual content, and jokes about topics including child molestation, rape, and suicide. The organization has filed formal FCC indecency complaints against multiple Family Guy episodes. The first formal complaint came after a 2005 rebroadcast of an early episode, though the FCC denied the complaint on the grounds that the episode didn't contain explicit depictions of sexual acts or organs. In 2010, the PTC filed a complaint against Brian and Stewie, the 150th episode, taking particular offense at the excretory content. PTC President Tim Winter accused MacFarlane of carefully reviewing the legal definition of broadcast indecency and setting out to violate it as literally as he could, suggesting a deliberate campaign to push against the boundaries of what was legally permissible on broadcast television. Additional complaints followed in 2013 over A Fistful of Meg, citing lewd sexual content and jokes about child molestation and exploitation, and in 2015 over Quagmire's Mom, citing sexually explicit dialogue and jokes about statutory situations. The PTC also attempted to pressure Family Guy's advertisers into pulling their sponsorship, targeting companies like Wrigley and Burger King whose products appeal to children. In an unexpected twist, the PTC president actually became friends with MacFarlane after filing a complaint about a 2015 episode. The relationship between the most vocal critic of Family Guy's content and the show's creator apparently mellowed over time, though the PTC has continued to flag individual episodes as problematic. One of the most significant behind-the-scenes controversies in recent years involved voice actor Mike Henry and his role as Cleveland Brown. Henry, who is white, had voiced the black character Cleveland since the show's inception. In 2020, amid broader discussions about racial representation in entertainment, Henry announced he would be stepping down from the role. He stated that he felt it was no longer appropriate for a white actor to voice a person of color and that the role should be filled by a black actor. The transition took effect starting with season 19, with actor Arif Zahir taking over as the voice of Cleveland. The change was part of a larger trend in the animation industry, with shows like Big Mouth and Central Park also recasting white actors who had been voicing characters of color. The Cleveland voice change was notable not just for its significance in terms of representation but also because it affected one of the show's most established and recognizable characters. MacFarlane himself has had a complicated relationship with Family Guy for years. He has publicly stated on multiple occasions that he believes the show has gone on too long and should end. In various interviews, he's expressed frustration with the weekly grind of producing a long-running animated series and has suggested that his creative interests have moved beyond the kind of humor that defines Family Guy. Despite these sentiments, the show continues to be produced, and MacFarlane has more recently adopted a different perspective, saying that at this point he doesn't see a good reason to stop as long as people still love it. The acquisition of Fox's entertainment assets by Disney in 2019 added another layer of complexity to Family Guy's situation. The show that had been Fox's edgiest animated property was suddenly owned by the most family-friendly entertainment company in the world. While Disney has largely maintained a hands-off approach to Family Guy's content, the association between the two brands has been a source of amusement and speculation among fans. The fact that Stewie Griffin and Mickey Mouse are now technically under the same corporate umbrella is exactly the kind of absurd juxtaposition that Family Guy itself would make a joke about. The omission of partial terms of endearment from Disney Plus when the rest of the Family Guy catalog was added to the streaming service underscores the ongoing tension between the show's provocative content and its corporate ownership. Disney was apparently willing to host hundreds of episodes containing graphic violence, sexual humor, and offensive jokes, but drew the line at an episode about abortion. The writing process behind Family Guy has been the subject of considerable public discussion and criticism. The show uses a writer's room format, with a team of writers pitching ideas and collaborating on scripts. MacFarlane has described the process as grueling, with the team working long hours and frequently pushing themselves to the point of creative exhaustion. He has acknowledged that fatigue sometimes leads to the writers defaulting to cruder, less sophisticated humor, particularly later in each season when the writing staff is running on fumes. South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone famously satirized this process in their Cartoon Wars episodes, depicting Family Guy's jokes as being randomly generated by manatees selecting balls from a tank. While this was an exaggeration, Parker and Stone's criticism touched on a real concern that many critics have raised. The cutaway gag format can sometimes feel like a substitute for genuine comedy writing, allowing the show to fill time with disconnected jokes rather than developing coherent storylines with earned humor. The voice cast of Family Guy is dominated by MacFarlane himself, who provides the voices for Peter, Stewie, Brian, and Quagmire, along with numerous recurring and one-off characters. This level of vocal involvement is unusual even for animated shows and gives MacFarlane an enormous amount of creative control over the show's tone and delivery. Alex Borstein voices Lois and other female characters, Seth Green voices Chris, and Mila Kunis has voiced Meg since the show's return after Season 3, replacing Lacey Chabot who voiced Meg in the first season. The relationship between MacFarlane and Borstein has been the subject of fan speculation for years, partly because of how many romantic pairings exist between characters they voice. MacFarlane voices Peter and Brian, both of whom are connected to Borstein's Lois. MacFarlane's Quagmire has been involved with Borstein's Loretta and other characters she voices. Some fans have theorized that MacFarlane's personal feelings for Borstein influence the romantic dynamics of the show, though there's no concrete evidence to support this beyond the observation that their characters are frequently paired together. The show's production timeline means that episodes are typically written and produced over a year before they air, which creates an interesting dynamic with topical humor. Jokes about current events have to be inserted relatively late in the production process to remain relevant, while the main storylines and character development are planned much further in advance. This explains why some of the show's most dated material involves topical references that felt fresh when written but were already stale by the time the episode aired. Family Guy's animation style has also evolved significantly over its run. The early seasons featured simpler, rougher animation that gave the show a homemade quality. As the budget increased and animation technology improved, the show became slicker and more polished, with smoother movements, more detailed backgrounds, and more ambitious visual sequences. The chicken fights, in particular, have become increasingly elaborate, with later installments featuring action choreography that rivals theatrical animated films in terms of complexity and ambition. The show's use of music is another underappreciated aspect of its production. MacFarlane is a talented singer and musician who released a Grammy-nominated album of classic standards in 2011. His musical abilities have been incorporated into the show through numerous musical numbers, from the elaborate song and dance routines of The Road to episodes to the show's iconic opening theme. The music of Family Guy is often better than it has any right to be, with compositions by Walter Murphy and Ron Jones bringing a level of orchestral sophistication that contrasts sharply with the show's otherwise crude sensibility. Now let's reach the deepest point of our iceberg, where we examine Family Guy's legacy, its cultural impact, and what it all means. Family Guy's influence on popular culture and the entertainment industry cannot be overstated, even if opinions on that influence are deeply divided. The show fundamentally changed what was possible in primetime animated comedy and demonstrated that there was a massive audience for humor that was cruder, more irreverent, and more willing to offend than anything that had come before. When MacFarlane first pitched the show in the late 1990s, the conventional wisdom was that The Simpsons had already proven the viability of adult animation and that the market couldn't support another show in the same space. Family Guy didn't just prove that wisdom wrong. It proved that the market was hungry for content that was significantly edgier than what The Simpsons offered, and that millions of viewers wanted comedy that pushed past the boundaries of taste and propriety. The show's premiere after Super Bowl 33 was a brilliant stroke of marketing that gave Family Guy the largest possible launch audience. But the show's real achievement wasn't attracting those initial 22 million viewers. It was building a cult following devoted enough to buy millions of DVDs, crash Adult Swim's ratings, and generate enough economic pressure to force a major network to reverse two separate cancellation decisions. That kind of fan engagement was virtually unprecedented in 2004, and the playbook Family Guy wrote for reviving cancelled shows through alternative revenue streams continues to influence the industry today. Before Family Guy, the landscape of adult animated comedy was dominated by The Simpsons, which had established the genre but operated within certain boundaries of taste and decency. South Park had pushed those boundaries further, but its cable home gave it more freedom than a broadcast network show could typically enjoy. Family Guy proved that a broadcast network could air content that was edgier than most cable programming and not only survive but thrive. The show's cutaway gag format, while heavily criticized by some, became one of the most influential comedy formats of the 21st century. YouTube compilations of Family Guy cutaways have accumulated billions of views, and the format has been imitated by numerous other shows and content creators. The idea that a comedy show could interrupt its own narrative to present an unrelated joke before returning to the story was revolutionary when Family Guy popularized it, and it has since become a standard tool in the comedy writer's toolkit. Family Guy also changed the economics of television in ways that continue to ripple through the industry. Its revival through DVD sales and cable syndication created a new model for how cancelled shows could find second lives. Before Family Guy, a cancelled show was generally considered dead. After Family Guy, networks and studios began paying more attention to the aftermarket value of their programming, recognizing that a show's performance on the original broadcast network was just one measure of its total value. The show's success on Adult Swim helped legitimize Cartoon Network's late-night programming block as a destination for adult animated content. The massive ratings that Family Guy reruns generated gave Adult Swim the credibility and financial resources to develop its own original programming, leading indirectly to shows like Robot Chicken, Rick and Morty, and countless other adult animated series that might not have existed without the audience that Family Guy helped build. Stewie Griffin's evolution throughout the series represents one of the most interesting character arcs in animated comedy. He began as a one-dimensional villain whose defining traits were his desire for world domination and his plan to kill his mother. Over time, he evolved into a complex, multifaceted character whose sexuality, identity, and emotional vulnerability became central to his characterization. The show's handling of Stewie's apparent homosexuality has been both praised and criticized. MacFarlane has made various comments over the years suggesting that Stewie's orientation is intentionally ambiguous, and the show has explored his attraction to both male and female characters without ever definitively labeling him. The episode Send in Stewie, Please, where Stewie discusses his sexuality with a therapist, was seen by many as a significant moment for LGBTQ representation in animated comedy. Stewie admitted that his British accent is fake, that he's deeply insecure about his identity, and that he's genuinely confused about who he is. It was a rare moment of authentic vulnerability in a show that usually uses humor to avoid genuine emotional engagement. Family Guy's relationship with controversy is perhaps its most defining characteristic. The show has never shied away from topics that other programs wouldn't touch, and this willingness to go where others won't has been both its greatest strength and its most persistent weakness. At its best, Family Guy's fearless approach to comedy has produced moments of genuine brilliance, jokes that make you laugh despite yourself and that illuminate uncomfortable truths about society and human nature. At its worst, the show's anything goes attitude has produced content that feels cruel, gratuitous, and harmful, jokes that target vulnerable groups not to make a point but simply because targeting vulnerable groups gets a reaction. The show's treatment of disability, race, gender, and sexuality has evolved significantly over its run, reflecting broader changes in cultural attitudes toward these topics. Early episodes contained jokes about marginalized groups that would be unlikely to make it past network standards today. The show has gradually become more thoughtful about which targets deserve mockery and which don't, though it remains far more willing to cause offense than most of its contemporaries. What makes Family Guy's legacy so complicated is that the show exists simultaneously as multiple things. It's a groundbreaking comedy that changed television. It's a commercial juggernaut that generates billions in revenue. It's a cultural touchstone that has shaped the humor of multiple generations. And it's a show that has caused genuine harm through its normalization of bullying, its casual treatment of sexual assault, and its willingness to target the most vulnerable members of society for laughs. The fan theories we discussed throughout this video are, in many ways, an attempt by viewers to make sense of these contradictions. The Peter's coma theory transforms a show about casual cruelty into a tragic story about a man coping with unbearable loss. The Stewie's perception theory transforms the show's inconsistencies into a coherent vision of childhood imagination. The multiverse theory resolves the dramatic shift in quality and tone between the pre- and post-cancellation eras. These theories exist because fans want to believe that there's a deeper meaning beneath the surface of a show that sometimes seems to have no meaning at all. Family Guy's impact on internet culture deserves its own analysis. The show became one of the first television programs to achieve viral popularity through online clip sharing. Long before YouTube existed, clips from Family Guy were circulating on early file-sharing platforms and message boards, helping to build the cult audience that would eventually save the show from cancellation. When YouTube launched in 2005, the same year Family Guy returned to Fox, the platform became flooded with Family Guy clips that introduced the show to millions of viewers who had never watched a full episode. This clip-based consumption model actually suits Family Guy's format better than almost any other show on television. Because the cutaway gags are self-contained and don't require narrative context to understand, individual jokes can be extracted from episodes and shared as standalone content. A random cutaway about Peter fighting a chicken or Stewie doing something absurd works perfectly as a 30-second video clip in a way that a joke from The Simpsons or South Park, which often depends on the episode's storyline for its full impact, simply doesn't. The meme culture surrounding Family Guy has become enormous, with Peter Griffin becoming one of the most used characters in internet humor. The Hey Lois meme format, where Peter says something outrageous to get Lois's attention, has been adapted and remixed millions of times across social media platforms. The phrase "Remember the time" has become a shorthand for the show's cutaway format and is used in everyday internet conversation. Family Guy has become so embedded in online culture that people who have never watched a single full episode can still recognize and reference its most famous moments. The show's influence extends beyond comedy into broader cultural conversations about censorship, free speech, and the boundaries of satire. Every time Family Guy generates controversy, it reignites the debate about whether any topic should be off-limits for comedy and whether the act of making jokes about sensitive subjects normalizes harmful attitudes or serves as a pressure valve that allows society to confront uncomfortable truths. These are questions that don't have easy answers, and Family Guy's continued existence on the air for over a quarter century suggests that audiences have collectively decided, for better or worse, that they'd rather have a show that occasionally goes too far than one that never takes risks at all. The road to episodes represent the creative high point of Family Guy and deserve special mention in any discussion of the show's legacy. These episodes, which feature Brian and Stewie on elaborate adventures that parody different genres and films, consistently receive the highest critical acclaim and fan appreciation of any Family Guy content. Episodes like Road to the Multiverse, Road to Rhode Island, and Road to Germany showcase the show at its most creative and emotionally engaging, balancing genuine plot development and character moments with the kind of ambitious comedy that the regular episodes rarely achieve. Many critics have suggested that Brian and Stewie should have received their own spin-off series, arguing that their dynamic produces better comedy and more compelling storytelling than the Griffin family as a whole. The economic impact of Family Guy extends far beyond television ratings. The franchise has generated billions of dollars through merchandise, video games, theme park attractions, and licensing deals. Family Guy merchandise was among the best-selling animation merchandise throughout the 2000s and early 2010s, with products ranging from clothing and accessories to home goods and collectibles. The Family Guy video game franchise, while critically mixed, sold millions of copies across multiple platforms. And the show's presence in Universal Studios theme parks introduced the Griffins to audiences who might not otherwise have encountered the show. Family Guy has also had a measurable impact on the careers of its voice cast and creative team. Seth MacFarlane used the show as a launching pad for a career that now spans film directing, live-action acting, music, science advocacy, and philanthropic work. His success has made him one of the wealthiest and most influential figures in entertainment, with a net worth that has allowed him to make significant donations to causes he cares about, including science education and environmental conservation. Mila Kunis has spoken about how voicing Meg helped sustain her career during periods between live-action roles. And Patrick Warburton has described Family Guy as the longest-running job of his career, one that has provided financial stability through its remarkable longevity. The show's longevity itself is becoming one of its most remarkable characteristics. As of 2025, Family Guy has produced over 400 episodes across more than 2 decades. It has outlasted most of the shows that were once considered its competition and has survived multiple shifts in the television landscape, including the rise of streaming, the decline of linear television, and fundamental changes in audience expectations about what's acceptable in comedy. The show that was twice cancelled for low ratings has become one of the longest-running American primetime scripted television series in history, trailing only The Simpsons and a handful of other programs. Whether Family Guy's legacy will ultimately be remembered as a positive or negative contribution to popular culture is a question that probably won't be answered for decades. The show is too embedded in the cultural fabric of the early 21st century to be easily categorized. It changed what was possible in animated comedy, for better and worse. It introduced millions of people to a brand of humor that was cruder, more fearless, and more willing to offend than anything that came before it. It spawned theories, controversies, memes, and debates that will continue long after the show finally goes off the air. And through it all, it remained stubbornly, defiantly itself, never apologizing for its excesses and never pretending to be anything other than exactly what it is. Whether or not any of these theories are true, the fact that they exist says something important about Family Guy's place in popular culture. A show that inspires this much analysis, debate, and theorizing is clearly doing something right, even when it's also doing plenty of things wrong. Family Guy may not be the most critically acclaimed animated comedy ever made, and it may not be the most consistently funny. But it is undeniably one of the most interesting, most controversial, and most influential shows of its generation. As of 2025, Family Guy shows no signs of stopping. The show has been renewed for its 24th season. MacFarlane has said he sees no good reason to end it, and the audience, while not as large as it once was, remains devoted and engaged. The show will continue pushing boundaries, generating controversies, and inspiring fan theories for as long as it remains on the air. And given everything we've covered in this video, from the surface-level basics all the way down to the darkest corners of the iceberg, it's clear that there's always going to be more to discover about this ridiculous, offensive, occasionally brilliant, and absolutely unforgettable show. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Family Guy iceberg, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. Drop a comment below and let us know which theory surprised you the most, or if there's a layer of the iceberg we didn't cover that you think deserves its own dedicated video breakdown. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.